They said the water would wash their sins away, but when the service ended, not one of them breathed witnesses swore the basin turned dark as ink. The pastor's voice kept chanting, long after the last souls sank beneath the surface, and for 3 days. No one dared touch the water. Asterisk, the water moves slowly here, not still, but heavy, the kind of river that doesn't glitter in the sun. It absorbs it on its banks. Just past the cypress and the leaning birches, there is a church, a plain, wooden, parish no taller than 2 stories. Its paint already graying by the time anyone remembers it. The bell doesn't ring during the day. It only rings at night, and the people who come here, they come when the moon is high. The parish was built in 1870 North Carolina, an outskirt village, closer to the swamps than to any town. The nearest railway was more than 10 miles away, and yet, every month, sometimes twice, wagons lined the dirt road, creaking with the weight of travelers. Families, widows, men with eyes that wouldn't meet yours. All of them drawn here for one reason: the baptisms. At first, it seemed like a novelty, a parish offering rites after dark, under torchlight, when the air was cool and still. They said the water, drawn from the river itself, was purer at night. They said Father Tolland believed the body was closer to humility when the stars watched. But there was more to it than that. Father Tolland had a way of performing the rite longer, slower, deeper. Each person was held beneath the surface, far longer than most could stand. Some said it was to ensure every sin was washed away. Others whispered that it wasn't the water doing the cleansing. It was something older, something in the words he spoke, and the church never wrote those words. Down the parishioners who stayed in the area called him a man of God, but not everyone spoke kindly. Local farmhands avoided the parish road at night, saying the singing from the river wasn't in any language they knew. Hunters claimed they found footprints along the banks, deep and bare, as though someone had been standing still for hours. And once, a boy from a nearby farm said he saw Father Tolland wading into the river alone, long after the baptisms were done, just walking until the water reached his chest, and then his neck. And then, the boy said he turned and ran before he could see what came next in the daylight. Nothing ever seemed out of place. The church smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. The pews, while cracked, were neatly kept, and Father Tolland, despite his gray, thinning hair and pale complexion, was polite to anyone who came calling. He offered tea, or sometimes a quiet reading from Scripture, but there was a tension beneath it. His sermons, delivered each Sunday, were strange. He did not talk of heaven. He did not talk of joy or of the kingdom awaiting the faithful. He spoke of weight, of burden, of water, as both punishment and relief. Older women in the village claimed it was just his way, that he had studied some older forms of doctrine, things the modern church no longer taught, but others thought it was more than that. The words didn't sound like teachings. They sounded like instructions, preparations. First true sign that something was wrong came in the summer of 1871. A woman named Maeve Dillard traveled from Wilmington, bringing her young daughter, a sickly child with a sunken chest and glassy eyes. Witnesses said she was desperate, that doctors had given the girl no more than a year. They came to Father Tolland on a humid July night, just before midnight. The other pilgrims were told to wait. The girl was taken first. They said the baptism lasted nearly 15 minutes, that when Maeve returned to the road with her daughter, wrapped in a wet shawl, she wouldn't speak, not to anyone. Her daughter, however, no longer coughed. She no longer wheezed. Her breathing was clear, but she never spoke another word. Maeve returned to Wilmington the next morning. The girl lived. She grew strong, but neighbors claimed they never heard her laugh, cry, or make any sound at all. And on Sunday mornings, she would walk alone to the river and stand at the edge, staring into it for hours. More families came after that. More stories spread. Some pilgrims claimed to leave cured of illness, while others whispered they'd seen the opposite men returning home frail, hollow-eyed, unable to stand in sunlight without shielding their faces. A few were said to have vanished entirely, their wagons left abandoned near the river road, the horses still tied. Each time the rumors grew. Father Tolland would give a sermon always the same words. Water remembers, it takes, it gives, it cleanses those who are willing, and it drowns those who aren't. And the people kept coming. The midnight gatherings grew larger. The torches along the riverbank burned brighter, lined in perfect intervals, leading from the parish to the water. Witnesses described the sound of chanting, though no one could make out the words. Not from a distance. Some nights, the chants stopped suddenly. Other nights, they grew louder, until the sound of splashing overtook them. No one ever drowned during the rites, at least, not publicly. But there were stories of bodies being carried quietly to the parish grounds. Unmarked graves, dug near the edge of the trees. The earth there was always damp, even when it hadn't rained by the winter of 1872. The parish was known well beyond the county lines. Travelers came from neighboring states, braving the cold to be baptized in that dark, slow-moving river. Some came willingly. Some were brought by families who whispered of afflictions not seen. By doctors, the rites were longer in winter. The water, colder. Father Tolland would walk into the river first, still and silent. Before gesturing for each penitent to follow, witnesses said his lips moved the entire time, but no sound escaped them. Yet the air felt different when he spoke, heavier, like the cold wasn't coming from the water, but from the words themselves. A few of the older villagers began to keep journals around this time. One wrote of hearing the church bell toll 3 times, just before dawn, though there had been no service that morning. Another claimed to see lights beneath the water pail, wavering glows like lanterns drifting under the surface. And once, a man from the next town claimed he saw something rise from the river and stand beside Father Tolland during a baptism. He never described what it was. He only said it didn't move, until the person being baptized stopped struggling. Then, he said, it sank back beneath the water. The man moved west a week later. He never returned. By the spring of 1873, the church was drawing more than pilgrims. Local authorities began to take notice, not of any crime, but of the whispers, the missing travelers, the unmarked graves. A sheriff from the nearby county rode out one evening to confront. Father Tolland. Witnesses said he knocked on the church door just as the sun went down. He was invited inside. He was never seen again. The following morning, his horse was found grazing along the riverbank. The saddle was soaked, not from rain. The sheriff's badge was still pinned to it, streaked with mud. After that, no one from the law came near the parish, not openly, not at night. Still, the baptisms continued. Father Tolland, older now, moved slower, but his voice never faltered. His sermons grew shorter, stranger. Some claimed he no longer spoke in words at all, but in murmurs and hums. His eyes fixed on the river even as he stood at the pulpit. Others said he carried a small book with him, bound in leather, with pages that seemed too brittle to turn. No one was allowed to touch it, and yet the people, they kept coming, because no matter how much fear the parish inspired, no matter how heavy the air felt when the bell tolled at midnight, there was something undeniable. Some who went into that water came out changed. Some found strength, some found silence, and some didn't come out at all. For years, the river carried no bodies downstream. For years, no official reports were filed. The parish stood, quiet and gray, while the torches kept burning, month after month. But by the winter of 1874, something shifted. The baptisms grew fewer. The travelers stopped arriving, and those who had once been baptized here began to avoid the river entirely. They would not speak of Father Tolland. They would not speak of what happened in the water, and they would not, under any circumstance, go near the parish after dark. No one remembers when the last baptism was performed. The church records, thin as they were, and abruptly that year, the bell stopped ringing, the torches were snuffed, and the river, once lined with wagons and whispers, went silent. But even now, locals say that if you stand by the banks on a still night, when the air is cold and the moon is thin, you can hear it, a sound beneath the water, not splashing, not voices, something slower, like breath. The torches burned lower that night, their flames bent with the breeze. casting long, wavering shadows across the riverbank. The air was damp, colder than it should have been for early spring, and yet more than 30 people stood in silence, waiting. The river was calm, the kind of calm that feels unnatural, not a ripple on the surface, except for the slow current pulling south, and on the far side, just beyond the reeds, the parish stood, its windows dark. Its single bell tower outlined against the thin moonlight. Father Tolland led the procession. He carried no lantern, only a wooden staff, polished smooth, its base tapping against the dirt with each step behind him. 3 families followed. They walked slowly, children at their sides, each wrapped in thick shawls despite the mild air. The others, the ones who had already been baptized, kept their distance. They stood near the torches, their faces pale, watching but not speaking. It was nearly midnight, the hour the rites always began. The families were told to wait at the water's edge. Father Tolland stepped forward first, his boots sinking into the soft earth. The river lapped at his feet as he waded in, his dark robes pulling around his legs. He did not shiver. He did not pause. He walked until the water reached his waist, then turned slowly to face the gathering. His voice was quiet, even and low, as though he were speaking to no one in particular. He began reciting the same words he always did, the ones no one outside the parish could ever quite repeat. The sound carried strangely, muffled and distant, as if the river itself was swallowing it before it reached the trees. And then he gestured. The first family stepped forward, a man and woman, both in their 30s, guiding a boy no older than 10. The child's feet dragged slightly, his eyes fixed on the river rather than his parents. When they reached the bank, Father Tolland held out his hand. The boy took it without looking at him. Together, they waded in the water, reached the boy's chest. He did not flinch. Father Tolland whispered something, his lips barely moving. Then, with one slow, deliberate motion, he lowered the boy beneath the surface. The crowd held its breath. 5 seconds passed, then 10, then 20. The boy's arms began to twitch, small, involuntary movements beneath the surface. Father Tolland's grip did not loosen. He murmured softly, his free hand drawing a shape just above the waterline. 30 seconds. The mother took a step forward. One of the older parishioners placed a hand on her arm and shook his head. 40 seconds. The boy's movement stopped, and then, finally, Father Tolland pulled him up. The boy gasped once, sharply, before falling silent. His eyes were open, unblinking. His lips moved slightly. Though no sound came, Father Tolland nodded once to the parents. The boy was guided back to the bank. He did not shiver. He did not look at anyone. The second family was called a girl, perhaps 8, was led forward by her father. She stared at the ground as they walked, clutching a small wooden cross in her hands. The father kissed her forehead before passing her to Father Tolland, who held her gently by the shoulders again. The water again, the slow descent this time. The father watched closely. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the hem of his coat. 5 seconds, 10, 20. The girl's cross slipped from her fingers and drifted downstream. She did not move. Her body was rigid, her face tilted upward, as if looking through the water toward the sky. 30 seconds. Her father muttered something under his breath. A prayer, perhaps. The others remained silent. 40 seconds. Stillness at 50 seconds. Father Tolland pulled her up. Her mouth opened, releasing a long, steady exhale. As though she had been holding her breath the entire time, her eyes were wide, glassy. She blinked once, slowly, then stopped blinking altogether. The final child was called a boy of about 12. He did not wait for his parents to guide him. He walked to the river himself, removing his shawl and stepping into the cold water without hesitation. Some claimed later that he didn't seem afraid, that he almost seemed eager. Father Tolland placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. He spoke no words this time, just lowered him beneath the surface. 10 seconds. 20, 30. The crowd shifted uneasily. The parents of the first 2 children stood apart, clutching their sons and daughters by the arms, whispering reassurances. The children did not react. 40 seconds. The boy beneath the water did not struggle. 50, 60. The water rippled once, briefly, as though something had passed beneath it. Father Tolland did not look down. He held firm at 65 seconds. He raised the boy. The child did not gasp, did not cough. He simply stood there, water running down his face, his chest rising and falling in slow, even breaths, and then the three children turned their heads in perfect unison. They looked at one another, then at the river, then at the crowd. Their lips parted at the same time. "It isn't clean yet." The words were quiet, almost a whisper, but every person on that bank heard them. The wind stopped, the torches flickered, though no breeze past the parents stepped forward, alarm flashing in their eyes. But Father Tolland raised his hand. His voice, calm as ever, broke the silence. "This is a sign," he said. "Rebirth speaks through them. Do not fear it. Do not question it." The parents hesitated. Some of the onlookers crossed themselves. Their hands trembling, the children stood still, their eyes unfocused, their lips moving as though mouthing words no one could hear. The rest of the night passed in silence. No more baptisms were performed. The families were told to return to the parish at dawn for prayer. No one spoke on the walk back. Even the children made no sound. The following morning, the parents claimed their sons and daughters were the same as before. They ate, they walked, they obeyed, but something wasn't right. Three children did not speak again for days, and when they finally did, it was always the same question quietly, at the edge of sleep, or when staring into the river from the parish windows. When will it be clean? By the end of that month, other families began to withdraw from the baptisms. Some refused to bring their children at all. Others whispered that the water had changed, that it left a residue on the skin, a faint, slick feeling that would not wash away. One mother claimed her daughter's eyes had darkened after the ceremony, the pupils dilating so widely they seemed to swallow the iris. No one believed her, at least not at first, but within weeks, more parents began to notice the same thing, the same glassy, distant stare, the same murmured words in the dead of night, the same quiet walks to the river just before dawn, when the children thought no one was watching. Father Tolland never addressed it directly. He only reminded his congregation that rebirth was not always gentle, that cleansing was a process, and that the river would not accept all burdens at once. Accepted his words, they had to, but some began to question. They wondered if the baptisms were purifying anything at all, or if they were simply leaving something behind. And then, in late summer, the first of the three children failed to wake. He was found in his bed, eyes open, body cold, lips parted as though whispering a word no one could hear. His parents claimed to have seen wet footprints in the hallway that night, leading away from his room toward the river. The other two stopped eating soon after. They spent hours standing by the water, motionless, their reflections barely visible in the dark current. When spoken to, they would only say the same words, "It isn't clean yet." The church sat silent that night, its timbers groaned softly in the wind, the sound carrying through the empty nave like a whisper that didn't belong. Beyond the glassless windows, the moon hung thin and pale, casting long shadows across the warm wooden floor. It was close to midnight, the hour when most of the parishioners slept, but not everyone. Deacon Ashford had arrived that week, sent by the diocese to observe Father Tolland's practices. He was young, barely 30, his black coat still crisp, his collar unstained by years of wear. He had not yet seen the midnight baptisms. Father Tolland told him his time would come, that first he should watch, listen. The parish was still. The cypress trees swayed faintly in the breeze outside. The air carried the faint scent of damp wood and river silt inside. The only light came from a single candle burning beside the altar, its flame low, the wax pooling at its base. Deacon Ashford couldn't sleep. The sermons unsettled him, not for their content, but for the silence between the words, the long pauses. Father Tolland left hanging, as though waiting for someone or something to answer back, and so, restless, he walked down the center aisle, past the pews that creaked with every shift of the wind, to the baptismal font at the far end of the nave. The font was older than the parish itself, some said. Its stone basin was rough-hewn, pitted from years of use, the edges worn smooth by countless hands. The water inside was still. Catching the candlelight in dull reflections, Ashford leaned over it, listening at first. Nothing, just the faint hum of wind through the walls, the flicker of the candle behind him, then a sound faint, almost imperceptible, like the low murmur of a crowd far away. He straightened, glancing around the church. No one, only the empty pews and the distant groan of the rafters. He leaned closer again. The sound grew sharper. Not voices, not yet, but syllables, fragments of words he couldn't place. The cadence was slow, measured, as though reciting a prayer he'd never heard before. Ashford held his breath. The candle flickered once. Though no wind passed the water, rippled, he stepped. Back instinctively, the ripples spread outward, slow and deliberate. Though nothing had touched the surface, the sound, those murmurs, rose slightly, overlapping now, as though more than one voice had joined. But something wasn't right. The voices weren't above the water. They were below it, resonating from the depths of a basin, no deeper than a child's arm. Ashford crouched, leaning closer still. His reflection swayed, stretched, as the ripples darkened the water, once reflecting the soft yellow of the candle, now seemed tinted, not opaque, not yet, but darker, like ink bleeding beneath the surface. Murmurs shifted, the cadence broke. What had sounded like prayer became something else, a strained rhythm, sharp and uneven, not words anymore, not fully, just breath. Ashford's fingers tightened on the edge of the basin. His knuckles whitened. He told himself it was just wind, the acoustics of the old church, the draft curling through the stones. But then, the voices stopped completely. The silence struck, harder than the whispers had. The air in the nave seemed heavier, pressing down against his chest. And that's when he heard it, not murmurs, not breath. A single, sharp scream. It came from the water, not beneath it, within it, as though the surface itself had split, and something had cried out from the void below. The sound echoed through the nave, rattling the candle in its dish, sending wax spilling down. The altar cloth. Ashford stumbled back, knocking against the first pew. The font's water churned now, the ripples no longer slow but violent, darkening fully until it looked like a pool of tar. The scream fractured, becoming many, overlapping, high and low, as though dozens of voices were clawing to reach the surface. He turned toward the doors, his breath quick, his throat dry, but the sound, those screams, cut off as suddenly as they had begun. Silence. The water stilled, black, unbroken. The deacon stood frozen, his pulse hammering in his ears. His reflection had vanished from the basin. No matter how he shifted, no matter how he leaned, the surface gave back nothing but darkness. He backed away slowly, his footsteps soft against the wood, until his hand found the handle of the front door. The latch creaked outside. The wind carried the distant rush of the river behind him. A single droplet of water fell from the lip of the font. The sound echoed, sharp, as though the nave itself were hollow. Ashford left the church and did not return until morning, when he told Father Tolland. The old pastor only nodded. He said nothing. He only led Ashford back inside, his steps slow, deliberate. The font was empty, dry as stone, not a trace of water, not a streak of moisture on its rough surface. Father Tolland placed a hand on the basin's rim. "Drain it," he said simply, and though there was nothing to drain, Ashford obeyed. He wiped it down, scrubbed it clean, the cloth in his hands catching on the pitted stone. By the time the sun began to rise, the basin was spotless. The screams felt like a memory, something distant, something explainable. But when Ashford returned at first light, the candlelight still weak through the windows, the basin was full water, clear and still, rising to the brim as though it had never been emptied. No mark of where it had come from, no sign of movement or filling or time passed. He reached for the surface with one trembling hand. The water was cold, colder than the river outside. It felt deeper than the basin could possibly be, and somewhere beneath that still surface, he thought he heard Ida whisper low, lingering, waiting. The fog came early that night. It rolled off the river in low, slow waves swallowing the parish road and wrapping the trees in pale shrouds. The torches along the bank burned low, their flames dimmed by the damp air, their light bending in the mist until the shapes they cast seemed to move on their own, the church still against the blur of white, its walls damp, its bell tower vanishing into the low clouds above. Inside, the pews where full dozens had come. Despite the cold, despite the unease that had begun to settle over the congregation these past months, they came because Father Tolland told them to, because, no matter what they whispered behind closed doors, none dared turn away. The midnight baptisms had become more solemn in recent weeks. No hymns, no soft recitations, only silence as the families waited by the water, their faces pale, their breaths visible in the air. Even the children, who once shifted nervously, now stood still, their hands folded tightly in front of them. On this night, it was quieter than ever. The mist dulled every sound, the rustle of leaves, the faint flow of the river, even the distant cries of night birds. The only noise came from the church baloney strike. It rang at the exact moment the moon slipped behind the clouds, a hollow, low sound that seemed to roll through the fog and vanish into the trees. And then, nothing. The bell rope hung still in the tower. No wind moved it. No one had touched it. The congregation glanced upward, their eyes drawn instinctively to the dark silhouette above. No second toll came. No call to gather. Father Tolland did not look up. He simply raised his hand, gesturing for the first family to step forward. But something wasn't right. The silence that followed the bell wasn't normal silence. It had weight, a thickness that pressed against the ears, as if every sound had been drained from the world, leaving only the faint rasp of breath. Even the river seemed to move more quietly, its slow current almost imperceptible inside the church. The baptismal font weighted the stone basin, scarred by age, had been filled as it always was drawn from the river before dusk, its surface still and black. It reflected only the faint glow of the candles set along the altar. No one noticed the first ripple. It was small, soft, barely a tremor, like a breath. Beneath the surface, then another, and another within minutes. The water no longer lay flat. It began to stir, swirling faintly in the circular basin. As if stirred by some unseen hand, the surface darkened, not in color, but in texture. The reflections grew sharp, jagged, the candlelight breaking apart, as though cast through oil, and then, without a sound, the water began to boil. No heat rose from it. No steam curled into the cold air, but bubbles rolled to the surface, breaking in uneven bursts, sending tiny droplets. Against the stone, the sound was soft, almost like breathing. A parishioner near the altar stepped back, her hand covering her mouth. The others whispered, their voices hushed and uncertain. Some crossed themselves, others simply stared. Father Tolland said nothing. He approached the font, his steps measured, his pale face catching the flicker of the candles. He leaned close, his lips moving in a low murmur. The words didn't carry, but the tone did, calm, deliberate, as though speaking to something, not to someone. The water stilled, the boiling stopped. For a moment, the basin was silent again. The reflections returned. Smooth and unbroken, the first family stepped forward. A mother, a father, and their teenage son. They knelt before the font as instructed, the boy clutching a small wooden cross in his hand. Father Tolland dipped his fingers into the basin. The water, though cool, clung to his skin like something thicker than water should. He traced a line across the boy's forehead. The boy shuddered. His breath hitched, but he did not speak. The rite continued as usual. The congregation watched. The font lay still by the time the final family had been baptized. The fog outside had thickened, pressing against the windows, dimming the candlelight to a faint glow. The bell had not rung again. The tower loomed silent above that night. The dreams began. Those who had been baptized woke gasping for breath, clutching at their throats, the sheets beneath them damp with sweat. Each one described the same vision, not of fire, not of light, but of water, endless, black water rising above their heads, pulling them downward. They could feel it filling their lungs. cold and heavy, even as they lay awake, their eyes wide in the darks, claimed they woke choking. Others said they never woke at all, not fully, that even when they opened their eyes, they could still feel the river pulling at them, dragging them back under the next morning. None of them would enter the church. Even when the sun rose and the fog lifted, they stood outside, staring at the bell tower, their faces pale, their eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep. The bell, once the signal for gathering, remained still. Its clapper rested against the side, motionless, as though something had bound it there. Father Tolland offered no explanation. He did not address the silence of the bell. He did not speak of the boiling water or of the dreams. He only told the congregation to keep their faith and to return the following week. But some did not. Several families packed their wagons and left before nightfall, their wheels kicking up lines in the dirt road as they vanished into the trees. Others stayed, but would not speak above a whisper. The baptized, however, could not leave even when they tried. Some packed, some loaded their wagons, but each time, before reaching the edge of the parish road, they turned back. Their hands shook, their breaths grew short. Each one claimed the same thing. They felt the river calling them, not with sound, but with weight. It pulled beneath their ribs, as though something deep and cold was drawing them back. By the end of the week, the bell still hadn't rung. The font, though drained each morning, was full again by nightfall, and the baptized had stopped sleeping entirely. Some wandered the riverbank at night, their eyes unfocused, their feet sinking into the soft mud. Others stood outside the church, staring at the tower, waiting for a bell that would never sound again. And inside, when the nave was empty, when the candles had burned low and the mist pressed against the windows, the water in the font began to stir again. The journal was found in a locked trunk, buried beneath a collapsed stairwell in the rectory. Its pages, though warped by moisture, were intact. The ink had bled in places, but the words could still be read. They belonged to Sister Eileen, the last nun to leave the parish alive, the only one who ever spoke of what happened there. Her handwriting was small, deliberate, the kind of script meant to be read only by the person who wrote it. But her words were not quiet, not the way they should have been. She wrote of the nights in the parish, how the baptisms had changed, how the doors were locked before the rites began. Every latch, every bolt. Father Tolland had ordered it. He said it was necessary, that the devil left only when every lung was empty. Eileen's first entry was cautious, almost uncertain. She wrote of whispers among the sisters, the way the air inside the nave seemed to press against their throats during the rites. She mentioned the children, first their pale faces, the stillness in their eyes after the long submersions. She wondered, quietly, if they were breathing at all when they rose from the water. Her later entries were different. The handwriting changed tighter. The words pressed hard into the page, as though written quickly. In the dark, she wrote that Father Tolland no longer waited for families to volunteer. He chose them, called them by name, and once the doors were shut, no one could leave until the baptisms were done. Some nights, she claimed, the rites lasted hours. Whole families would kneel by the font while one by one, each was lowered into the water. Tolland whispered over them, his voice low, his hand firm on their foreheads, holding them beneath until their bodies stilled. Only then did he let them rise. Something wasn't right. Eileen described the sound of the water, not the splash of movement, not the drip of what spilled over the basin. She wrote that it shifted when no one touched it, that it rolled in small waves, circling the basin like it had its own current. Some nights, she said, it rose higher along the rim, as though swelling with something unseen. She never said she believed it. She only wrote what she saw, and she admitted more than once that she questioned her own senses. But the entries continued, and they grew more frantic. One night, she claimed the font was empty when she entered the nave to prepare for the ceremony. She turned away for a moment to light the candles. When she looked back, it was full, completely. No sound of filling, no trace of movement. She told Father Tolland he only looked at her, his expression calm, his voice softer than usual. He said, "It is not ours to question how the river gives." Eileen began marking the pages with times, noting when the water moved, when it darkened, when the whispers started. She said she heard them herself, late at night, when the nave was empty and she passed the font on her way to the dormitory, whispers rising from the water, just above the surface, never clear enough to form words, only the faint sound of something speaking or breathing. The sisters grew frightened. Several refused to attend the rites. One locked herself in her room and did not come out for 3 days. When Father Tolland found her, he led her to the font himself. Eileen wrote that he told the others not to follow. She was not seen again. The journal's final entries were written across torn, uneven pages. The lines were crooked, the ink blotted where the pen must have pressed too hard. Eileen wrote that the baptisms had become something else, that Father Tolland no longer spoke of cleansing, that his sermons turned instead to surrender. She wrote of the night the font overflowed. No one had touched it. The water climbed the rim, spilling silently across the stone floor, spreading in a thin, unbroken sheet toward the pews. The sisters backed away, whispering prayers, their feet slipping in the cold film. Tolland stood by the altar, watching. He did not move. He did not speak. Eileen's last clear sentence came near the bottom of the page. "It moves even when the doors are locked." Below it, the ink was smudged lines of words crossed over one another, impossible to read, the strokes heavier and more erratic. One phrase repeated, faintly visible beneath the layers. "It rises when we breathe." The trunk that held her journal was found decades later. During the demolition of the rectory, the wood was swollen, the lock rusted, but the air inside was strangely cool. The journal lay at the bottom, dry despite the moisture in the surrounding walls and beneath it. A single droplet of water, clear cold, resting on the wood, though no leak could be found. Those who handled the journal later claimed the pages were damp the next morning. Though no moisture marked the trunk or the air around it, some refused to touch it after that. Others left it where it was, inside the ruins of the rectory, rather than take it away. But the words remained the warnings of the last nun to leave. Each line marked by a hand that seemed to grow more desperate as the nights wore on, and her last legible note, scrawled sideways across the inside cover, reads, "Only do not breathe near the water." The nave was heavy with candlelight that night. Dozens of flames lined the pews and altar, their glow casting long, flickering shadows against the stone walls. The air was warm, still, and faintly metallic, as if the room itself had been holding its breath for too long. The font had been filled hours before drawn from the river. As always, clear still waiting it, was a mass baptism. More than 20 gathered men, women, children. Some had been chosen by Father Tolland. Others had come forward themselves, hoping the rites would quiet the unease that had gripped the parish for weeks. Doors were bolted, the windows shuttered. Only the low murmur of the congregation broke the silence as they stood in 2 lines leading to the basin. The candles hissed faintly, their wax pooling across the floor. Father Tolland moved slowly among them, his hands clasped at his waist, his robes brushing the stone with each step. He did not speak at first, only paused before each family, his eyes settling on them one by one, as though taking measure of their resolve. When he finally approached the font, the room went still. Even the murmurs stopped. He raised his hand, gesturing for the first child to step forward, a girl, no older than 8, clutching her mother's sleeve. Her bare feet moved reluctantly, her eyes locked on the basin ahead. Father Tolland whispered the first lines of the rite. His voice carried low, almost inaudible, yet every person in the nave seemed to hear it. Girl was guided to the edge of the basin. Her mother's hand lingered on her back for just a moment before pulling away. Water caught the light, softly smooth, reflective, until it wasn't at first. It looked like a shadow, a faint darkening beneath the surface, no wider than a hand. Then it spread slowly, deliberately, like ink unfurling through paper within seconds. The entire basin had shifted in tone. The clear reflections of the candles warped, breaking apart, swallowed by the deepening black. The surface still mirrored the room, but faintly, as though behind a layer of smoke. But something wasn't right. The girl hesitated. Her toes touched the surface, and she recoiled. Her face tightening, she whispered something to her mother. Those closest to the font would later say it was only 2 words. Too thick. Father Tolland said nothing. He placed a hand on the girl's shoulder, guiding her gently forward, his palm pressed firmly between her shoulder blades as he lowered her into the water. The sound was wrong, not the usual soft splash of water, but a sluggish movement, as though her body had been swallowed by something. Heavier, the basin rippled lazily, each wave slower than it should have been. She sank quickly, too quickly. Her mother gasped, stepping forward, but one of the older parishioners held her back. Tolland's hand remained steady, his gaze locked on the rippling black surface. The girl's outline was faint beneath the water, blurred by the dark sheen. 10 seconds passed. Then 20 no bubbles rose to the surface. The water shifted again, not in ripples, but in a slow circling motion, as though the basin itself had found a current. Some witnesses swore later they could feel it in the floor beneath their feet, a faint vibration, subtle but constant, like the hum of something living. When Father Tolland pulled the girl up, her limbs hung loosely at her sides. She coughed once, a small, shallow sound. Then her eyes opened wide, unblinking. She did not look at her mother. She did not speak. She only turned her head toward the basin, water trailing from her lips, her fingers twitching slightly, as though reaching back toward it. The rite continued one by one. Each person stepped forward. Some resisted, others obeyed quietly, their faces pale, their movements slow each time. The water seemed heavier, clinging to their clothes and hair, coating their skin in a faint sheen that would not dry more than one sank without any sign of struggle, their bodies sliding beneath the surface as if the basin had no bottom. And then, as the 11th parishioner was lowered, the candles dimmed, not extinguished, not flickered by wind, just dimmed, their flames thin to thin blue threads, barely lighting the nave. The congregation froze. Some looked toward the doors, as if expecting them to open. Others stared at the font, where the water now moved on its own, rolling in slow, circular waves that lapped silently against the rim. Father Tolland's voice did not waver. He continued the rite, his words low and deliberate, his hands never leaving the body beneath the water. Those closest swore he did not blink, that his lips barely moved, that his focus was fixed entirely on the black surface. 12th parishioner did not rise, not quickly, not at all. The basin rippled faintly. Then stilled. Father Tolland did not reach for the body. He only stepped back, folding his hands once again at his waist. A single drip of water fell from the rim to the stone floor below. The sound echoed sharp in the silence, and then the next family stepped forward. No record was ever kept of how many entered the font that night. The parishioners who survived refused to count, even when pressed by those who came after. Some claimed that only a handful rose again. Others said the rites went on until dawn, the basin never emptying. No matter how many were submerged, the doors stayed locked until Father Tolland himself opened them. The congregation filed out in silence, their faces pale, their clothes heavy with water that did not drip or dry the font. When finally drained, left behind a dark residue along the stone, a faint, oily film that clung to the basin, even after it was scrubbed. None who lived through that night would ever describe what they saw in the water, but every one of them stopped speaking altogether within the month, and the basin, no matter how many times it was emptied, never reflected candlelight the same way again. Trees along the river bent in the wind that morning. Low clouds crawled above the parish road, their edges stained yellow by the rising sun. The sound of hooves and cartwheels cut through the still air as the diocese investigators arrived. They had been sent 2 days after the last mass baptism, 2 days since the bells had last been heard. From the tower the parish was silent. No movement at the windows, no voices in the courtyard. Even the cypress trees that bordered the ground seemed motionless, their roots knotted into the soil like blackened fingers. The men dismounted carefully, their boots sinking into the damp earth. None of them spoke at first. Each step toward the church felt heavier than it should. The air itself seemed weighted, as though sound carried slower here. One of them, a young cleric named Brannock, remarked quietly that he couldn't hear the river anymore, though it flowed less than 50 feet away. The others only nodded and kept walking. Doors to the nave were unlatched. They swung inward with little resistance, the hinges groaning faintly as they opened inside. The air was colder, not the clean cold of winter, a still cold, the kind that clung to the throat. The investigators spread out along the center aisle. Dust lay thick on the pews, disturbed only by the faint impressions of footprints, bare, narrow, leading toward the altar. Dozens of them, some deep, as though whoever left them had been soaked through, the water darkening the wood in uneven trails. No one was there, not a single voice, not a single sign of life, until they saw him, Father Tollin, kneeling by the baptismal font. His robes were soaked, clinging to his frame, the fabric stiff with dried residue along the hem. His head was bowed low, his lips moving in a dry, repetitive rhythm. No sound came from his throat, but they could see the cracking of his lips as they formed words over and over. His hands rested on the rim of the basin. His knuckles, pale, strained the water inside. Was wrong, it was black, not reflective, not clear. The surface did not shift with the faint drafts that moved through the nave. It lay perfectly still, like a sheet of polished stone. Even the candlelight along the altar failed to catch on it, as though it swallowed every flicker of light before it could reflect. But something wasn't right. Brannock stepped closer, his breath catching as he leaned over the basin. There was a smell, not rot, not decay, something heavier, metallic, like old coins left in water. Too long it clung to the back of his throat. Sharp and coldy, reached toward the surface. His fingers, trembling, the water did not ripple when his fingertip touched it. Instead, it gave slightly, like pressing against thin oil. Resisting for just a moment before letting him break through, he pulled his hand back immediately. His fingers were clean. Dry, no water clung to his skin, despite having touched it. And that's when he heard out a faint sound, rising from somewhere below the surface. Not voices, not words, just a low, sustained hum. Like the vibration of a deep note held far longer than it should be. Brannock stumbled back, his heel catching on the edge of the first step. The sound cut off. The water stilled again. Perfectly flat. Father Tollin did not move. His head remained bowed. His lips still shaped those silent syllables, unbroken by the presence of the investigators. When they tried to lift him, his hands tightened on the rim of the basin. His nails dug into the stone, the tips splintering as they scraped across its rough surface. He would not release it. It took 2 men to pry him away. Even then, his body sagged as though his strength had gone entirely into keeping hold of the basin. His lips kept moving, the cracked skin tearing with each motion. No sound escaped, only the faint hiss of air passing his teeth. The investigators drained the font, bucket by bucket. They carried the black water outside and poured it into the soil. Each time, the liquid resisted, clinging to the rim as though reluctant to leave. When it hit the ground, it left no mark, no dampness, no sign of where it had landed. When the basin was finally emptied, Brannock filled it again from the river-clear water, cold and moving as it should. For a brief moment, the nave seemed lighter. The candles burned brighter. The air felt easier to breathe. But then, slowly, the surface began to darken again. Not from below, as before. This time, it spread outward from the center, bleeding into the clear water like a shadow, stretching in every direction within minutes. The basin was black once more. Still silent, Father Tollin's lips stopped moving. His head lifted slightly, his eyes half open but unfocused. He whispered, barely audible, his voice rough and dry. It does not pour out, it only waits. The investigators sealed the church that evening. They barred the doors, boarded the windows. Father Tollin was taken away, his hands still trembling, his nails torn and raw. He would not speak again after that night. The font, left behind, was found full the next morning. The boards had not been broken. The doors remained bolted from the outside, yet the basin, was brimming black unmoving, as though it had never been touched. One of the men swore he saw a ripple spread across the surface as they left, a slow, deliberate wave that lapped silently against the rim, even though no one stood near enough to disturb. If the others refused to confirm it, none would return to look again, and by the time the diocese made its final decision on the parish, the church was already abandoned. The doors stood open, the windows shattered by wind. The bell tower was silent, but the font was still full. The church stood silent beneath a sky that had turned the color of lead. The trees around it had begun to lean, their trunks angled slightly toward the river, as though bowing. The wind moved strangely there, slow, heavy. Every sound, from the creak of branches to the hiss of the reeds by the water, felt distant, muffled, as if filtered through cloth. It was in this stillness, weeks after the diocese sealed the grounds, that the last ceremony took place. No parishioners were left. The nearby village was all but empty, its streets lined with abandoned carts and doors left ajar. Yet, on that night, 27 pilgrims gathered outside the locked gates. No records say who they were, no journals, no parish logs, no burial lists. The only trace of their arrival is a faint set of footprints, pressed deep into the soft mud along the path to the nave. Bare, narrow, staggered, leading in. No prints lead out. The doors to the church were barred. Yet when dawn came, they stood open. No sign of force, no broken wood or metal, just open, swinging gently in the wind inside. The air was sour. The candles lining the nave had burned themselves to the end, leaving long, hardened streaks of wax along the altar rail. The pews were dustless, wiped clean as if someone had taken care to erase any sign of neglect. But there was no one there. No voices, no bodies, only the font, still full, still black, its surface unbroken, perfectly level, even as a draft slipped through the broken windows above. But something wasn't right at the base of the altar. A chalice had been left, its stem cracked down the middle, the silver dull and streaked with a residue that caught no light inside. The cup was filled, not with wine, not with water as it should have been, but with the same dark liquid from the basin, thick, unmoving, stagnant. Though no flies touched it, no one knows why the chalice remained or why it was placed at the altar instead of hidden away. Some say it was used during the last rite, passed from pilgrim to pilgrim as they stood by the basin. Others believe it was left behind as proof, the only sign that anything had taken place at all. The investigators who found it refused to touch the liquid. They poured it into the earth outside, near the tree line, and watched as it sank without a trace. The soil stayed dry, the surface undisturbed, as if it had never been poured at all. When they returned to the nave, the chalice was full again. The men swore they had emptied it. They searched for leaks, for cracks, for any sign the font had refilled it, but the basin stood several feet away, its surface undisturbed. The chalice sat alone on the altar rail, brimming silently with the same black water as before. And that's when one of them heard a faint sound, coming not from the basin, not from the chalice, but from somewhere in the nave itself. A steady, low rhythm, like the slow pull of breath. An out-measured patient. The others claimed they heard nothing, but the one who did refused to step any closer. He dropped his pack by the door and left without a word, walking the mile back to the road without once looking behind him. The others never saw him again. The church was abandoned fully after that day. The diocese marked it condemned, warning locals not to approach. They said nothing about the pilgrims. No names were taken. No graves were dug. It was as if those 27 never existed at all. But the chalice remained, even after the altar was stripped, even after the pews were torn out and the doors were sealed a final time. It sat where they had found it, cracked, cold, filled to the brim with water that would not dry or drain, no matter how many times. It was removed. One worker, tasked with boarding the windows, swore he saw the liquid shift, not ripple, not bubble shift, like something beneath the surface had turned over once, then stilled again. He didn't finish the job. The boards on the east window remain loose to this day, the chalice is still there, or so they say, kept in the same spot, on the same cracked altar rail, untouched by dust, though no one cleans it. Locals who walk past at night claim to see a faint sheen of moisture on the church steps. Even when it hasn't rained, no one can explain where it comes from. No one goes inside to check, and while there are no names, no headstones, and no official record of who stood at the font that final night, some say that when the wind moves just right, you can hear something through the east window. Not words, not voices, just that same measured breath in-out, over and over, long after the doors were locked. The chalice, they say, never empties, and the basin never reflects the sky. Even now smoke still clung to the trees for days after the church was burned. The walls had collapsed inward, leaving only a blackened outline where the nave once stood. Charred beams jutted from the earth like ribs, their tips pale against the ash. The bell tower was gone entirely, its stones scattered in the courtyard, as though something heavier than fire had pulled it down. The air was quiet, not the peaceful quiet of a countryside morning, a strained, hollow quiet. Even the wind moved cautiously there, rustling only the outermost leaves of the cypress trees before fading back into stillness. And just beyond the scorched grounds, the river stopped moving. It had always been a fast current, a cold, steady flow that carried silt and reeds downstream, feeding the marshes beyond. But after the fire, the surface dulled. The ripples smoothed out. The sound of running water, once a constant presence, simply ceased. At first, the villagers thought it was the ash, clogging the channel, weighing down the flow. They waited for rain to clear it, but the rains came, and the river stayed still. Its surface grew a pale film, faintly iridescent in the sun. Each morning, new patches of green and brown spread across it, broken only by the occasional bubble, rising and bursting without a sound. By midsummer, the river had taken on a smell, not rot, not exactly, something like wet iron left in a closed room, metallic and suffocating. But something wasn't right. The animals knew it first. Cattle refused to graze near its banks. Deer that had once come to drink at dusk now bolted at the sight of it, their hooves tearing deep ruts in the soil as they fled. Even birds avoided the water, circling wide when they flew overhead, their calls sharp and frantic. Before going silent at night, the sound began a faint splash, sometimes distant, sometimes alarmingly close to shore, rhythmic, deliberate, not the frantic strike of a fish breaking the surface, but something heavier, measured like footsteps in shallow water. Fishermen along the upper bend swore they felt vibrations through the line when they cast, not tugs, not bites, just a slow dragging pull beneath the surface, as if their hooks had snagged something that moved, but did not fight. A few said they glimpsed shapes just beneath the film of stagnant water, long pale, sliding away the moment they tried to focus. And that's when one of them heard it late one night. A man named Cohen, fishing alone by lantern light, swore he heard a sound rise up from the river, not a splash, not the hum of current, something closer to a breath, slow and hollow, drawn out, as if the water itself exhaled beneath him. He left his net in the reeds and didn't return the next day, or the day after. His lantern was found weeks later, half submerged near the bank, still upright, its glass cracked, but intact. The wick inside was dry, as though it had never been lit by autumn. No one approached the river. The village dug shallow wells for water, hauling buckets from miles inland, rather than dip a single cup into the stagnant current. Even crossing the footbridge made travelers uneasy. The boards had gone slick, not with algae, but with a faint, oily residue that no one could identify. It left no stain on the hand, but the smell, faint and metallic, clung to the skin for hours. The splashing continued always at night, sometimes faint, sometimes loud enough that the villagers woke, clutching their blankets, straining to hear if it was coming closer. The sound always stopped when anyone tried to investigate. The moment a CEA foot touched the bank, the surface would settle still, flat, as if nothing had ever moved. A few brave souls threw stones, hoping to break the quiet. The ripples spread, slow and even too slow, like the water was thicker than it should be. The circles reached the center of the river and simply stopped. No rebound, no fade. The surface stayed indented, the depression holding for minutes before vanishing all at once. No one fished there anymore. No one drew near after sunset. The river, once the lifeline of the parish, had become a wound in. The land open, motionless, unhealing. And then, in the second winter, the ice came late, even as the marshes froze. The river remained liquid, not flowing, not freezing, just still. Its film grew thicker. The smell heavier. Travelers, passing on the ridge above, claimed they saw faint movements under the surface. Not fish, not branches, something larger rolling slowly. As though turning in shallow sleep, the villagers tried to burn the banks. They dragged brush and dry wood, set fire to the reeds and trees along the edge, hoping the smoke would drive out whatever lingered there. The flames caught quickly, leaping high in the dry air, but the wind shifted. The smoke hung low over the water, unmoving, clinging to the surface without dispersing. When the fires died, the reeds were gone, but the film remained. Those who passed the river in the years that followed said it never changed. Not truly. Some seasons it appeared lighter, clearer at the edges, but by dusk, the same pale sheen always returned, always unbroken, always quiet, until night came and the splashes began again. One farmer, returning late from the ridge, swore he saw a single hand rise up from the water, pale, wrinkled, still gripping something, a length of wood, perhaps a broken oar. It slipped beneath the surface without a sound. The farmer left the village the next morning. He would not speak of what he'd seen beyond those few words. He would not cross a river again for the rest of his life. Even now, the water near the burned parish runs stagnant. No animals drink there, no one fishes it, and when the wind dies down, the faint sound of splashing can still be heard, not frantic, not playful, deliberate, measured like footsteps, pacing endlessly beneath a surface that never truly moves. And some nights, when the moon is low, it almost sounds like more than one. The chain-link fence rattles in the wind. Its metal glints dully under the weak warning sun. The top row bent inward, as though something or someone had climbed over more times than anyone cares to count. Beyond it, the old churchyard lies in ruin. The earth is uneven, pocked with ash and weeds. Half-buried bricks mark where the foundation once stood, each one darkened by decades of soot and rain. There are no paths anymore, only faint trails cut by. Those who still come here, despite the posted signs and the warnings etched into weather-worn boards. No trespassing, condemned grounds keep out, and yet they come, the curious, the thrill-seekers, the ones who have heard the stories. It isn't the ruins they look for, not the cracked walls or the hollowed bell tower, not even the remains of the river, which now lies hidden behind thickets of dead reeds, its surface still coated with the faint, iridescent sheen that never fades. They come for the basin. It rests in the weeds near where the altar once stood, half collapsed. The stone split down one side, its rim chipped, and rough moss creeps along its outer curve, reaching into the cracks like veins. Its bowl is shallow now, the break along its side making it impossible to hold water for long. But every morning, it is full, not with rainwater, not with dew. The liquid inside is darker, denser, at a distance. It looks black, as though the basin holds a shadow rather than water. But when the explorers step closer, the surface shifts, not with wind, not with touch. It moves on its own, but something wasn't right. Those who have filmed it say the camera picks up a distortion. The edges of the bowl blur slightly, as though the air above the surface bends. Sound dulls near it, the hum of insects, the chatter of wind through the weeds all soften, receding into the background, as if the basin draws the quiet around itself. One explorer, a man in his 20s, reached down once, dipping a finger into the liquid. He pulled it back immediately. His hand was dry, perfectly dry, no residue, no dampness. But he swore his fingertip felt cold for hours afterward. Not numb, not painful, just cold, lingering. He didn't return. Others have tried to empty it, One group brought plastic containers, siphoning the liquid until the bowl lay bare, its stone exposed for the first time in years. They carried the liquid to the tree line and poured it out into the soil like before. The ground showed no dampness. The liquid vanished the instant it touched earth, leaving only the faint metallic smell that clung to their hands. By the time they packed their gear, the basin was full again. No sound of rain, no trace of runoff. The liquid simply appeared, its surface flat and unbroken, as if it had been waiting for them to look. And that's when he heard it, one of the explorers, lagging behind as the others climbed the fence to leave, paused near the basin. The wind had gone still. The reeds stood motionless, their tips sharp against the gray sky. From somewhere beneath the basin, faint and muffled, came a sound, a low, steady hum. Not mechanical, not natural, something in between, drawn out like the vibration of a deep string held taut. He leaned closer, his breath fogging in the cold air. The hum stopped the surface of the liquid, shifted, not rippled, not stirred by air. It pushed outward, a single pulse, as though something beneath had exhaled. The pulse reached the rim and stopped. The liquid stilled the man, left his pack behind, and climbed the fence without looking back. The others didn't ask why, they only noticed later, while reviewing footage, that during those final seconds near the basin, their microphones had gone silent. No wind, no birds, no sound at all, save for the faint, hollow note that played for exactly 7 seconds before cutting out the basin. Remains fenced, watched, but never removed. No official agency has claimed it. No crew has attempted to haul it away. Locals say it isn't for lack of trying. Some who work in the area whisper that every effort to move it ends the same way. Chains snap, equipment fails. Workers quit after one shift, claiming the air near it is too heavy, the silence too deep, and every morning, without fail, the bowl is full again. The liquid never splashes, never evaporates, never freezes in winter. It only waits level and still, no matter what happens around it at night. Some claim to see faint shapes in the weeds, figures standing still, their reflections caught not in the liquid, but in the glass of broken windows scattered nearby. No one can explain why or why. When they approach, the shapes vanish. Though the basin remains undisturbed this day, the explorers who return say the same thing. The basin doesn't feel abandoned. It feels occupied, and as dawn breaks, when the first light touches the rim, they swear the liquid shifts, just once, a slow, deliberate movement, rolling beneath the surface before settling into stillness. Again, some say it's only the wind. Others say it isn't wind at all, and those who climb the fence to leave rarely look back to find out. Asterisk. Water is meant to cleanse, but sometimes it keeps what it is given. If you ever find yourself by the ruins of St. Tollin's Parish, and you see a basin filled, though it has not rained in weeks, do not touch it, do not look too closely, and above all, do not ask who is still beneath the surface. Asterisk.